Okay, good evening. Putnam Democrats are very happy to have with us tonight Matt Metz, who's running for public defender for Circuit District 7. He is on the ballot as a Republican, and we're Democrats. That's okay, because everybody gets to vote on this one because only Republicans are running in the race. And I'm very happy, Matt, that you took the time to come out, be a part of the conversation, help voters make up their mind. So why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and qualifications for the job.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time to talk about this office and my passion for it. I was born and raised in Daytona Beach. It's where I currently live with my wife, Sarah, and we have two children, Lyons, who's 4, and Charlotte, who's 2. Growing up here, I went to Father Lopez Catholic and then went on to the University of Florida, go Gators, where I graduated with my degree in business management and went there on full scholarship. Went on to Florida State University, go Noles. Spent my time there getting my Juris Doctorate and graduated cum laude. After I left there, I began studying for the bar. But unlike many people, I actually got hired to do a full-time job just 2 weeks out of law school. And that was working for the Public Defender's Office as an intern here in Daytona Beach. So while I was working 40 hours a week, I was studying on nights and weekends to attempt to pass the bar. Passed it on my first try, and then jumped right into being a misdemeanor attorney. I did that for about 10 months and then got promoted to being a felony attorney. And after a few years, I became the felony division chief of our largest trial division, which is here in Daytona Beach. I'm in that role now, where I currently supervise 12 other attorneys and their staff. And I do that while handling a caseload of my own that tends to fluctuate between 100 and 130 cases. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation we're in right now, I also have ballooned a caseload, which is sitting around 170 cases. I'm the only candidate who's currently supervising a large staff and other trial attorneys, and I'm the only candidate who's a board-certified criminal trial attorney. Board certification is a special designation given out by the Florida Bar when completed with both peer review and extra examinations. It's only held by approximately 7% of lawyers throughout the state of Florida. And I believe throughout the 7th Circuit, I'll have to check, but I believe the number's around 22 attorneys for all 4 counties who are board certified criminal trial attorneys. So I'm especially proud of that designation. I've been with the office for almost a decade now. And in that time, I've got to see a lot of what we do well, some of what we can do better, and I've got some great plans for the future. Most importantly, I would like to see our office work on the employees that we're bringing in, making sure we're going and trying to get the top tier law students. Obviously, as a public sector job, we're always going to have trouble competing with some of the cash handed out by some of the big law firms. But because our circuit lands with all of Volusia, Putnam, Flagler, and St. John's, we've got a lot to offer. First, we have a very low cost of housing, which means that the dollar stretches a little farther because the starting salary for every assistant public defender throughout the circuit is approximately $50,000. And $50,000 in Putnam versus $50,000 in Miami is quite a different story. So we have a lot to offer there. And then we need to make sure we're training them well. So I'd like to set up a training program that involves having a mock trial as well as a structured continuing legal education system throughout our offices where we rely on our own expertise and strengths to make sure we're all learning enough. And lastly, we need to focus on how we're using technology throughout the offices and continue to innovate to make sure we're staying ahead of the technological curve. So I'm Matt Metz, and I'm running to be your next public defender, and I'm really excited about it. I'd love to answer any more questions.
Okay. Give us a little bit of background of what the Public Defender's Office covers, its breadth, and then how it's accessible to the public and what your mission is.
Absolutely. So the Public Defender's Office was created out of a Supreme Court decision years ago called Gideon versus Wainwright. And in that case, the Supreme Court said, if we're going to have fair trials and justice like we've written about in the Constitution, we can't do that unless a lay person has the ability to have access to an attorney. And right now, most people can't afford one. What we found is that about 2/3 of all of the criminal cases in the 7th Circuit, which again includes Putnam, Volusia, St. John's, and Flagler, come through the Public Defender's Office. So we represent everyone who can't afford their own attorney. Now, what that means is for anyone who makes less than double the federal poverty limit. So as an example, a family of 4 making around $50,000 would be just below that threshold. And so we are taking everyone who's charged with a felony, misdemeanor, a capital case, if they're charged with criminal contempt, or a crime under Florida Chapter 316, which generally involves driving offenses like DUI and reckless driving. And what we're focused on is ensuring that due process occurs. We can't always guarantee someone that they're going to be found not guilty or that they're going to get the result they want. But everyone deserves to have the same fair and just process. What that means is they have the right to have the charges known to them. They have the right to have a fair bond. They have the right to confront any accusers that may be alleging that they committed a crime, and the right to present their own evidence at trial. And to do that competently, they need good attorneys on their side to make sure that all the truth comes out. That's the only way we can get fair trials.
About how many cases does the public defender handle in your circuit in a given year? A normal year, I'm not sure.
So it's important to know, we at the 7th Circuit actually have a special designation. There's 20 elected public defenders with 20 circuits throughout the state of Florida. 5 of them have a separate budget and a separate office for appellate attorneys. And we are one of those circuits. And the reason is the 5th District Court of Appeals is here in Daytona Beach. So we get an entirely separate budget for example, our budget right now is approximately $13.5 million for both offices. And that covers a trial side, which is approximately 60 trial attorneys and staff, and then the appellate side, which is another approximately 30 appellate attorneys and staff. And so that's where the entire $13.5 million goes to. And because of that, we handle approximately 1,000 appellate cases, which are spread out between, I believe, 18 different counties, because there's only 5 of those throughout the state of Florida. And then we have approximately 35,000 criminal cases spread through the misdemeanor, felony, and capital divisions throughout all 4 counties every fiscal year. Now, some cases could have the same defendant for multiple cases, so we don't necessarily have 35,000 defendants come through, but we have approximately that many cases, which are handled by these 60 trial attorneys throughout the 4 counties.
Okay. And somebody comes into contact with your office when they get arrested, or they call, say, a complaint's been filed against me with something, and then at that point you start your relationship with them?
So the very first time someone's going to see our office is at first appearance. The Public Defender's Office covers first appearances throughout the entire year, including on weekends and holidays. And so there's always going to be someone from our office out there ensuring that there's probable cause found every time someone's been arrested. And now at that time, we're doing a role that isn't necessarily specific to each person. We're going through the reports. A more specific attorney-client relationship is going to develop later on. After a person's been charged, they can then apply for our office with an affidavit of indigency. And they can do that immediately after they've been charged. They don't have to wait for a court date. You can go on the Public Defender's website or on the Clerk of Court in most of the counties, and you can get a copy of that affidavit, and then you can provide it to our office. We'll give it to the clerk, and then we can start working on your case once you've been found to be indigent for the purposes of the cost of the public defender. And at that point, normally we'd have you come in for an office appointment. Of course, that's not happening nearly as much now. Most of the offices are, if they're not shut down, they're partially shut down because of the closure of the courthouses, which are generally where we work out of. Though Putnam's a little different, we have a separate office in Putnam. But we're trying to work with people to be talking over the phone, over video conference if necessary, and doing whatever we can to make sure we're just keeping up with all of our clients.
Okay. And what do you see as the biggest challenges for your office, and what kinds of things would you address if it became your office?
So there's a couple of different challenges at our office. One of the big ones, obviously right now, is the COVID situation that we're in. Because of it, we have 2 major issues going on. Our ability to access and talk to our clients, which is obviously always an issue. We want to make sure that those folks who don't have any resources, they may not have cell phones, they may not have the ability to just reach out and talk over email, that they're still able to get in contact with us. So to the best of our ability, we've been keeping our office open for people to at least make that contact and then try to find a way to speak with people. Additionally, COVID is going to result in a budget shortfall across the entire state of Florida. We're not exactly sure what that's going to be in the long run, but it's guaranteed to take away resources from every major organization that's paid through a state fund. And for those of your listeners who don't know, the Public Defender's Office is paid through three major funding sources. The first is the General Revenue Fund from the state of Florida will pay for a large portion of our salaries and benefits. We then also get paid through county funds. Each individual county is required to pay for certain resources that generally go to our physical building in terms like chairs, desks, computers, laptops, those sorts of things. I believe, as an example, the Volusia County paid approximately $750,000 last fiscal year. Putnam, I think, played somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 towards the physical office space. And the large difference is largely because we have a lot of our IT infrastructure in Volusia County. And then we also have a third funding source, which comes from tickets. So anytime there's speeding tickets, the vast majority of them include a separate $10 charge amongst the many charges that come through speeding tickets. And we get a small portion of that $10 is associated to us by statute. Now, obviously, there's been less drivers, so there's less speeding. There's fewer tax dollars coming in for both the county and the state. So what we're going to have to do is work with a higher caseload with fewer dollars. And that's going to be a big issue. And it's going to come down to training and triage. We're going to have to make sure that we're focusing the most resources on the people who are in the biggest trouble. We're also trying to help each other out. If someone gets low, manages to keep their caseload down, they can't just rest on their laurels. They're going to have to step over and help out. I've already been in talks with our appellate office, who currently doesn't have a lot going on because cases aren't going to trial. So they don't have anything that's being appealed. So instead, they're going to come over and start helping us out with a little bit of the extra caseload. Okay.
Very good. Now, shifting over a little bit to the specifics of Putnam. You've been around for a while, you've read in the papers, and it's pretty common knowledge that when it comes time to rank the counties in Florida, Putnam is down there. Quality of health, even though it's a beautiful country, rural, still the quality of health is one of the lowest in the state. Life expectancy, K-12 education until very recently was next to the bottom. Median family income, the amount of growth that's going on, the issues of all of the bright kids going off to college somewhere else and not coming back. So that the labor pool is skewing in one direction, and employers want more of the high end, and they're having to import it from other counties. So it's a kind of a mess. Do you see any way in which your office or the Office of the Public Defender can begin to tackle the underlying issues of that, which frankly, the number one is poverty?
So what I've talked to a lot of people about is that when you look at the criminal justice system in Florida, we have one of the highest prison incarceration rates of the world. If we were a separate country, we would, I think, rank in the top 10. And while some people look at that and see that as a win for justice, what I see is that we're likely over-incarcerating a lot of clients. And that doesn't just lead to someone being out of the workforce. Obviously, we lose their tax dollars if they're working, but we're also a lot more likely to have their family end up on government services, and their children are a lot more likely to be incarcerated later on. And for every person who you put in prison instead of a form of rehabilitation, you're much more likely to have them come out and be a recidivist offender later on. So for every dollar we can put into giving rehabilitation, treatment, job training in the criminal justice system, we're going to save dollars later on down the line. It's really hard to put that into a way that allows people to want to spend the tax dollars in that way. And I understand it. We're a country that believes in self-reliance and responsibility, and I absolutely agree with that. But there has to be scale. We have been increasingly harsh on criminal penalties as a state farther and farther along. And because of that, we're shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to the pool of workers, our tax base, and the future of our own economy. So I think if we can be better as an organization in protecting our clients' rights and humanizing them to the criminal justice system, so that people aren't looked at as a number, but are rather looked at as a person who made a mistake, and seen as a continuum of their life and not just the single thing that defines them. We're going to have more people stay in the community, and the more people who stay, the more likely they are to work, to pay their taxes, and to be productive in the future. One of the things I've talked about is restorative justice. I think it's important. What it would allow is to have victims of crimes and defendants communicate. And normally we separate these people as much as possible in the criminal context. The only time they ever see each other is in court with bailiffs between them. And that, I think, leads to a dehumanization on both sides. We obviously want to make victims whole. If you have a loss monetarily or emotionally, we don't want you to have to walk away from this experience with that not paid. But what we would like people to know is that punishing people for long periods of time isn't likely to do that. You can get closure and have restitution without someone being imprisoned for decades at a time.
Okay. Which kind of leads into the next question that relative to law enforcement over the past 3-4 decades has become more and more society's response to really not legal problems, but emotional problems, aftermath of veterans with damage from combat, kids growing up in homes where they are not taught the kind of etiquette, behavior that we're interested in. And then all of a sudden, the law officer is asked to come in and intervene. What do you think your office can do to help alleviate some of that pressure on the law enforcement side?
So the biggest problem we have with that is that we're a reactionary organization. You know, we can only get someone, constitutionally, we're limited to spend our resources for the defense. And because of that, we only get someone after they're arrested. But as we talked about before, if we're focusing on having as little recidivism, as few people come back into the system as possible, then we're still working on keeping people out of the system's hands in the future and not having that contact by police officers in the future. And one of the things we can do is when we talk about restorative justice, you know, we'll get cases all the time where, let's say, for example, it's a battery on a law enforcement officer. Someone's being arrested for something small, maybe driving without a license or disorderly intoxication. Then they turn around and spit on a police officer. Now that's become a third-degree felony. It has the potential of ruining their entire future because of one single act. Of course, as someone who has got an older brother in law enforcement, I understand how both harmful it can be to be spit on for someone who may be positive with HIV or AIDS or have other diseases, communicable diseases, especially in the age of COVID. But also, when we try to get that sense of scale, it's very hard to do with these two people never see each other again. So when we're talking about keeping people out of the system in the future, we need to humanize that system now. And I would love to see a situation where officers are allowed to talk directly to those people and explain to them how hard their job already is on a daily basis, to then have that person recognize that their actions
Okay.
just
Looks like Zoom killed us right now.
time.
Okay, are you back?
Did I lose you for a second?
We lost a little bit, and what you were talking about, the restorative justice and trying to get both the officer and the defendant to better understand how that interaction could have gone differently if they understood each other a little bit more. I think that's where you're going.
Absolutely.
Okay. And if that is the point, then what I'm saying right now would be part of it. If I said what you're saying correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Let me get off the script a little bit and ask about one of the issues that has frequently come up is bail. We're dealing with the court now is tapping into what little family wealth the poor family has. Is that something the public defender's office has any influence on or any way to pursue?
as an organization, we have already been advocating for non-monetary bail conditions. It is, for those of your members who aren't completely aware of what we're talking about, in the criminal justice system, it's often the case where a monetary bail is given anytime someone's alleged to have committed a crime. There is a bail schedule in the Seventh Circuit, and in it, it gives recommended monetary amounts for most criminal charges. For the smaller charges, the second-degree misdemeanors, it's often recommended they be given ROR or $500 bail. But even a third-degree felony, non-violent, is generally recommended at $2,500. To a bondsman, that's at least $250, which can be a large sum of money to a family. And when we talk about third-degree felonies, that can be anything from felony battery all the way down to possession of a single pill without a prescription. You know, if you're holding one Xanax for a relative and you're otherwise searched by an officer during that time period, you're now committed a third-degree felony and may be subject to those bail restrictions or conditions. Because of that, what we find is that statistically, we see that it's true that there are disparate reactions and endings based on that. If you have a couple $1,000s in savings, having to give over $250 is not a big deal. If you do not, then having to give over that $250 may mean the ability to make rent later on. Or if you don't have it at all, it means you may be stuck in jail until either the prosecutor decides to give you a plea, the judge decides, you get an opportunity to plea open to the judge, or you get to go to trial. And that trial may be weeks or even months from when you're initially arrested. And during that time period, you could lose your job, your housing, or any other number of terrible results from that one action. And so what we have is a system that effectively ends up disproportionately affecting those people who are on the lower income spectrum. And it's unfortunate, but I think we're starting to get some movement, especially around the country, to non-monetary bail conditions. And as the middle classes become smaller and smaller in America, I think it's necessary to effectuate what we would see as justice for all throughout the entire system.
It kind of got into the next question of maintaining the middle class. And you've given one example of how your office can pursue that. Have you and your colleagues talked about things that could be raised as ways to help the poor and the middle class maintain what wealth they have and move forward?
So having alternatives to fines, judges have been good recently about allowing community service at the rate of $10 to $15 an hour to pay off fines and court costs when available. Looking for and maintaining, this is something I'd like to see our office really start focusing on, opportunities for work for convicted felons. Many of the people who come to our office already have been convicted of felonies in their past. Some go months, some go years without having a new criminal charge. But what often happens is when they get one, they then lose that whatever job they were maintaining. So having a resource where they can then go back and immediately start applying for other jobs while their charge is pending or immediately after it becomes over, I think is something invaluable we can do so that the person isn't necessarily starting from scratch. It can just be really hard when you have that scarlet letter F for felony on your back, walking in, regardless of whether or not it was something that, was a theft from 10 years ago, to a drug charge, to something that was nonviolent and necessarily shouldn't affect you the same way, shouldn't be the same for every single felony.
Okay. All right. Challenge to find out how to have those discussions. Kind of I'll let you summarize now. And one of the questions, if you could put in your summary, tell us a little bit about the Public Defender's Office in Putnam County, where it's located, and how people can access it, and then go on into your summation, and we'll wind this down.
Absolutely. So the Public Defender's Office in Putnam is located just next to the courthouse on the west side. So if you're coming from the bridge, you just go past the courthouse a little bit in the same parking lot on the far side, close to the other government building there. And so it can be accessed from just from there from the outside from anyone who's trying to come in. And we have a reception desk. And if you have any questions, they'll be happy to guide you to who you need. The most important thing for anyone looking for help from the Public Defender's Office is communication. And what we found and what every lawyer tends to find is that most of the complaints we get are from communication issues. And one of my biggest goals is going to be seeking to act to the Public Defender's Office from a customer service side. The biggest difference between us and most other what you might call retail organizations is that the customer isn't always right, but the customer will always be listened to. We often have to tell people that their thoughts or opinions of the law are wrong, or that they're unlikely to get what they expect to get based on the criminal justice system. But what we can always do is present that information in a respectful manner and in a timely manner to the people asking for it. We can't promise results, but we can promise respect. And that's something anyone's going to see out of my administration, my organization. It's the same standard I hold myself to, and it's what I expect out of anyone that I will employ as your next public defender. This office is one that's extremely important. It not only is a safeguard to all the constitutional rights, your right to, whether it's to freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom to own a firearm, or for religion. If there's ever an unconstitutional law passed by your state legislature, it's most likely going to come before a public defender before it gets to any other private attorney, because we handle the large majority of the cases that come through the system. And so we're going to be the ones on the front lines arguing and challenging those unconstitutional laws. And we're also those that are most likely to come in contact with those with the least resources, whether they're housing insecure, food insecure, or just simply unable to otherwise make ends meet. Those are the people we see most often on our docket. So we need people who are both understanding, communicative, empathize, but also are going to be fighters for the Constitution. Those are the people I'm going to look to employ.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Matt. It's been a very nice discussion. I enjoyed it. Actually, would like to sit down for a much longer one, just in general and policy issues. So I'm going to end the recording now with a thank you, and wishing you well in the election.